Lots of people around, there's some ships offshore, and I'll just park here and I'll give you the story. Okay, so we're parked now in Wells Park and we're facing Kwinana Bulk Jetty, KBJ it's called. It's a Fremantle Ports facility, 2 berths, 75,000 tonne ships. There's one that's being unloaded at the moment, unloading fertiliser, and we'll see some trucks going backwards and forwards from time to time if we sit here long enough. That's actually the ship being unloaded. If we look out to sea, there's a number of ships berthed out in the channels and areas, and I can see about 6 or 7 of them out there. They're incurring what is called demurrage. Now, demurrage is essentially parking fees for ships waiting to be unloaded, and that can cost sometimes $15,000 to $20,000 US a day. So it's a very important cost of the berthing and unloading or loading process. It's got to be minimised. So why is that important? Well, the jetty itself is running at about 80% capacity. That means it's pretty busy, and the busier it gets beyond that, the more demurrage will be occurring. So operating that sort of port operation, the operator wants to minimise the demurrage, but keep it as busy as possible. So that's what's occurring there. I would say that's a constraint on industry. If we had another berth, a 3rd berth, and there's been one planned off and on for many, many years, but it hasn't happened, it's probably due to the government not allocating the capital to the Fremantle Port Authority to build the jetty. But you know, with all of the boats out here, you can see that it's necessary. Now, we've got people fishing around the place. On a weekend in the summertime, there could be 100 people here, quite easily 100 people here. And what happens if if there's an accident with the dangerous chemicals being unloaded from that ship? Well, what do the people do? They don't really know what to do. We've got a safety process in place, and there's notices around, but when something happens, the ship has to blast its horn, and basically the signs say for people to get out of it and head south to Rockingham, which is where the grain past where the grain terminals were. There's a bit of local knowledge around the place. The concrete structure in front of us, where the people are fishing down the end, there's a little metal structure sticking out, rusty metal. That's actually the bow of the SS Kwinana, the steamship. It was wrecked here, and just for that local knowledge, Kwinana means pretty maiden, and there's a sign here in the park that gives the story for that. So we'll leave the park now and we'll head on up through the yellow part of the industrial area, the old industrial core. So Wells Park, busy little place, and you know my thoughts on parks, public parks in industrial areas, but it's here to stay. So be it. Now we'll continue on our journey northwards once we get out of here. Okay, so on our left is some land that is available for lease. There's not much left in the Kwinana Industrial Core. On our right is the Puma Energy tank farm under construction. That's going to be a very big facility when it's finished. Directly ahead of us is the western profile of Nickel West, and you can see towards the south where the crane is, that's where the nickel sulfate production facility is under construction. So what have we got here now? Well, we've got Coogee Chemicals directly ahead of us on both sides. That's those tanks. They purchase their fuel wholesale from the Bhp Oil Refinery and wholesale that out to all of the service stations around the place. So very busy. Over here we have a couple of bitumen plants. They import the bitumen, and that's what's used for our road construction and so forth. They're relatively new entrants into the industrial area, and of course they're welcome. The railway line we can see over on this side is the single line into and out of the industrial area. The line is operating at 80% capacity, which means if you can get another slot for a new train of new goods delivery, congratulations, but you probably won't get another one. Now, just over here you'll see some strange looking vessels. Well, they're called Isotainers. They contain some very dangerous chemicals, and Coogee store those safely for industry. They come in through Fremantle and they're stored here for use. Some of them are quite aggressive catalysts used in chemical processing plants around this area. Where we're heading for now, past the two bitumen plants, one being Sammy and the other being Puma bitumen, is to where we saw KBJ before, the Kwinana Belt jetty that was unloading those two ships. Well, there's those ships straight ahead. We're going to turn around here and we'll move out, but over on that side you can see some of the storage sheds that Fremantle ports have. Now, the company that we're looking at here is CSBP, part of the West Farmers Group. They started off as a cooperative producing fertiliser for the wheat belt and surrounds and out into the agricultural areas, but many years ago they branched out into other production of other chemicals for industry, such as ammonium nitrate, which is, yes, it's a fertiliser, but it's also a blasting agent used to bring on mine sites for the drilling and blasting. There is a gold reagent, which is the sodium cyanide. That's exported as well, not just exported into the wheat belt or the mining areas rather, but also overseas, and it's exported in shipping containers. About 1,800 shipping containers a year go out through Fremantle. That's sodium cyanide. Lots of trucks around crossing the single railway line, and I do harp that's actually one of the key constraints, key strategic issues for us to resolve, is the increasing the capacity in the railway line. If a train comes in at the moment, it has to go out the same way. It has to reverse out. One way in, same way out. What we want to do is make it one way in, different way out. Now, you'll notice that the gardens around here are very well maintained, manicured, I would say. There's a reason for that, and the owner of Coogee Chemicals has famously told me that it's his wife who insists. She's a horticulturalist. She insists that the gardens are very well maintained. So, of course, therefore they are. This side of the road on my right is what I called that. Remember the third synergy I spoke about, the secondary industry belt. So the secondary industry belt includes industries that could be advanced fabricators or constructors. So some of the kit that you see, some of the buildings, the advanced engineering workshops for the maintenance of these facilities, also labour hire, plant hire, that sort of thing. So there are part of those, the 30,000 workers that attribute their jobs to the industrial work in the secondary industry belt. So we're coming up now to a fairly major intersection. We're going to go west into the industrial area. If we look over here, we will see a company called Chlor Alkali. That company makes essentially chlorine for industry. Chlorine is a very aggressive chemical used in stripping down other chemicals. So that's an important part of industry, very integral into the industrial symbiosis chain. And around here on our right is a company called New Farm. They were doing it pretty tough there for a while. They supply agricultural chemicals into the Australian agricultural scene. Things are picking up now because the drought on the east coast is over. Over on this side we see Tronox. Tronox recently acquired a company called Crystal. They make titanium dioxide, and titanium dioxide is used as it's a white pigment, also exported in containers out through the inner harbour at Fremantle. It's used in things like toothpaste and paint and so forth. Now on this side we have Bock gases. Now if you drink fizzy drink, beer or soft drink, the bubbles come from here. The CO2 comes from here, and then they get a lot of their CO2 from CSBP, as it was a waste stream, and that's another symbiotic relationship. We're now crossing our single railway line again, and heading deeper and deeper into the core. Now what we see directly ahead of us here is the Bhp production facility where the green stacks are, and the tank farm, which is where obviously where the fuel's stored. This is the entrance to Tronox. We're not going in, we're just going to take a little diversion down this very little known road to a company that's run by the Water Corporation, and it's called the Kwinana Wastewater Reclamation Plant, or QWERP. QWERP exists to provide very, very high quality water to the neighbouring heavy industries, and it gets its water from Woodman Point, except it's not actually directly from Woodman Point. Woodman Point sends its wastewater right down the length of the Western Trade Coast and out through the back of Garden Island. It's called the Sepia Depression Ocean Outfall Line. So this little place here makes about 6 million litres of water a day for industry, and as I say, it's very high purity water, and it's great because it's recycled water. There's plans to increase the production in there, and I think that's probably due to happen anytime soon. Good view of the operations of Tronox, and Tronox, one of the key industries in the industrial area, and also a key industry in the industrial symbiosis chain. Now interestingly, they make a product, titanium dioxide, which has a byproduct of steam. Steam is required at the chlor-alkali plant, which makes the chlorine, which is next door. I showed you that just before, next door. And so chlor-alkali make the chlorine for the Water Corporation to put into our drinking water. So you can see how interconnected they are. Now we're going to move further into the core. There's a fair bit to get through in here, a fair bit happening. We have a waste accepting business here called Cleanaway. There was a fire here just recently. You can see the building there. There was a fire. It was well contained, and there were no dangerous emissions, and the Department of Fire and Emergency Services did a very good job in containing it. Now on this side we have the last remaining large block of land, 75 hectares in the Kwinana Industrial Area, has been allocated to a company called Covalent Lithium. This will be our second lithium hydroxide plant once it gets going. It's in its very early stages, only just going through the planning approvals processes at the moment. So there's a fair way to go, and it will be, as I say, it will be the second. Now I'll show you a little bit later on in the tour where the first one is, and that is called Tianchi. It's just over here, but we'll get a better look at that later. Now the land directly ahead of us is owned by the Fremantle Port Authority, Fremantle Ports, and it is a very large flat area that's used for storing bulk materials like iron ore or bauxite for export, and it arrives by rail, tips into a bottom dumping shed, goes up onto a stacker, and makes the windrows in preparation for being loaded out onto the ships. So this operation's been around for quite a long time. The orange material that you see at the moment is bauxite. The jetty that services this area at the end is called KBT, Kwinana Bulk Terminal. It has a shallower draft for the ships and is restricted to 55,000 tonne ships. So it's also operating at 80% capacity or thereabouts, which means that it pretty much can't get any busier. So we list this also as a constraint on industry. It does need an injection of capital, whether that's for extending the jetty to say 2 berths, or potentially it could be deepening the berths, and it could be for replacing the equipment, the cranes that you can see on the jetty. So you heard me talking before about the Westport project, the government's Westport project. That is drawing to a conclusion. The task force has made its recommendations to the minister, and the minister is considering when that report will be released. So in essence, what the report is recommending is the deindustrialisation of the inner harbour, which is the containers and break bulks, to bring it down from Fremantle to Kwinana. And it's assessed all of the options between Fremantle and Kwinana and Bunbury. Bunbury is not an option, and the report says that remaining in Fremantle is not an option. So the new port will happen in Kwinana. The real question is, over what period of time does that transition occur? Industry says it should be sooner rather than longer term, and I'll talk about why that is shortly. The configuration that industry prefers is the land-backed configuration. So that means basically from this fence line in front of us all the way north to the Alcoa Alumina exporting jetty, which is a couple of kilometres, is for the new port. And it would extend out land back, but it would be a reclamation somewhat further out into Coburn Sound and then extend further north. The width of that is yet to be determined, and Westport are currently doing more study work and so forth on that. Because we've just got the one jetty here, it's like it's just one jetty. We actually believe that it should be a number of jetties over time, because it's a constraint on industry. It's got a very big land-backed area, so it can support the storage of more materials either imported or exported, but it's constrained firstly by the rail getting to it and the pace at which ships can be loaded and unloaded. And remember, there's only one berth. So my view is that the Westport process is now has rightly considered expanding it. It's expanded its scope to rightly consider what goes on with KBT, Kwinana Bulk Terminal, and its environs. Now, one of the advantages of increasing the number of berths for ships is that we could bring in the spodumene concentrates for secondary processing within the Kwinana Industrial Area. So what that means is it's like exporting bauxite or iron ore. They're products that have no value added to them, they're just exported. What I'm talking about is bringing in those sorts of products to be processed here so that the value is added. I mean, for example, Coburn Cement import clinker. Now that's a pretty basic product, but what's it used for? Well, it's used in the manufacture of cement. So that means that it's a product that's brought in to add value. If we can bring in more products and set up the processes to add the value, we are creating a downstream processing industry. And to be honest, Western Australia really does need to get itself better equipped and better able to be able to do more downstream processing, because it creates far more jobs and it adds a lot of economic activity into the state's economy. Right, let's head now through around some of these new industries that are coming in, and then we'll go into where the new port could actually be sited, a place called Barter Beach, which isn't actually a public beach, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So you can see the BP Oil Refinery to the right. That's the production facility for it. Ahead of us, over to the right, we have a little energy company in here that produces electricity for BP, and it gets its fuel source as the waste products from BP, and they're also exporting electricity into the grid. So that's another set of synergies that is occurring now. Directly ahead of us is the Tianqi lithium hydroxide plant. This will be, I think it's the world's biggest lithium hydroxide production facility. It's huge. It's a great story. We'll see more of the kit on the other side, and we'll park up and you'll see that. So Air Liquide directly ahead of us, another company producing industrial gases for industry around the state. You can see 3 cylinders. They're actually the concrete buns for the LPG production facility. Now, LPG is produced from the gas in the pipeline, the LNG that comes down from Dampier all the way to Bunbury. So they're making a lot of industrial gas for power generation, but also for domestic consumption. You can see how big that site that's been allocated to Covalent is. We've been driving along. It's probably 600 or 800 metres long. It's a big site. As I say, it's the last big remaining site in the Kwinana Industrial Area, and that means, therefore, that we need to find new, additional, heavy land zoned suitable for heavy industry. And I'll talk about that when we come into the latitude 32 area a little bit later on in the tour. Now we're going into turning left here across the railway line. This is the railway line that feeds the Fremantle Port the Fremantle Port's bulk storage area. I get a little bit tongue-tied sometimes because I've got a lot to say. Over here, the little blue thing is the Perth Energy. That's a peaking power station. It produces electricity when it's really needed. The little building over here you see is called BMT company. It produces mercury that you can hold in your hand. Obviously don't do that now, but it's taking the waste stream from the oil and gas industry way up north, which has mercury as one of its nasties in the product stream. They take it out. It's in a liquid in a fluid. It comes here and is through a chemical process. The mercury is recovered and it's sent to industry. Now, both sides of the road here are small blocks of land that would be available for lease to companies coming into the strip. The company directly ahead of us here is Sims Metal. Sims accept and source metal, scrap metal from around the state. They sort it into different metal type piles, and then they shred it, and it's exported out through Fremantle. So that's another, you can see some trucks in there. There's a lot of truck movements between here and Fremantle for scrap metal being exported. They moved here on the basis, about 5 years ago, on the basis that the new port would be built and they could get a rail siding to the port. So they're very keen, like many industries are, to have the new port built in Kwinana. We're running up parallel to the main line that comes into the industrial area now, and there'll be a better view of that as we go over a bridge a bit further on. So to our left and straight ahead, we see, and I'll pull over here to give you a good view, we see the Tianqi lithium hydroxide plant, and there's some really interesting stories to be told about this. So I'll just pull over here and tell you them. Oh, here comes a train. That's a bauxite train going back to fill up again. Okay, and I'll stop the car. So all of the kit, which is the construction that you can see, about 80% of it was made within 5 kilometres of here. And that's a terrific story of local content. It tells the world, because the world's watching Tianqi, it tells the world that the secondary industries, the secondary industries in the Kwinana Industrial Area in the Western Trade Coast can produce top quality equipment for very advanced chemical processing plants. Now, that's a showcase, and it's really important for the state that it demonstrates that it can produce this equipment. So local jobs, local content, good story. Now we'll see where all of that kit came from soon. Tianqi has 2 waste streams. The first is, so imagine that there's a truckload of their spodumene concentrate arrives from the mine. 4 or 6% of what's in that truck is actually the final product. So the 94 or 96%, checking my maths, of what was in that truck is going to become a byproduct. What do you do with that? Well, you can truck it all the way back to the mine, or you can separate it and find markets for it. So let's talk about it. There's 2 main products coming out of Tianqi, byproducts. One is a product that you can use in the manufacture of concrete. Well, in the industrial area, there are concrete manufacturers, tilt-up panels, for example. So that byproduct stream is sold, could be sold to the concrete tilt-up panel manufacturer as an ingredient into their concrete. What about the other one waste stream I just spoke about? Well, if you look right over in the distance, you see a little beige roof. When you get close to it, it's not that little. That's Coburn cement. They make cement. The other byproduct that Tianqi produces is used in the manufacture of cement. And I believe there's an arrangement in place that Coburn Cement is going to purchase Tianqi's waste stream for that process. How good's that? So that is an example of industrial symbiosis triggered when a new company comes into the industrial area. But the story doesn't end there. There's some cranes over in that direction you'll see on the skyline. That's the second waste to energy plant that I was talking about. Well, it's actually the first one because it's well under construction. One of its byproducts is also an ingredient in the manufacture of cement. So guess where that's their fly ash and bottom ash. Guess where that's going? To Coburn Cement, literally over the road. Their other major byproduct is electricity, because the process generates electricity through boilers. It makes steam by recovering the heat, the energy, makes steam, turns turbines and produces electricity. Well, my understanding is that Tianqi is going to be acquiring that electricity, or a good proportion of that electricity. The rest will go onto the grid, but there's another synergy. So 4 synergies, because one new company is coming to the industrial area, and it makes the waste to energy company, which is Avitas, it makes them more viable because one of their waste products is an input into a utility into another company. So I've taken a fairly long story there, but that's industrial symbiosis at work. And I talk about it in a horticultural sense. So you've got this orchard with low-hanging fruit, mid-hanging fruit, and high-hanging fruit. And all these exchanges are based on commercial realities, so they have to work. Financially, they have to work. So the low-hanging fruit gets picked quite easily. That's the easy synergies, and the medium hanging fruit when the time's right. The high-hanging fruit stays there, never gets picked, because it's just commercially unviable. But when a new company like Tianqi comes in, we get a new season of flowering, so we get a new season of fruit, and we get new low-hanging fruit to pick. That's the analogy I use, and people seem to get that. All right, let's keep going, shall we? Directly on my right, which I should have pointed out, is the Kwinana Motorplex. It's a speedway. It was put there many years ago, 15, 18 years, maybe 20 by now, we don't like it because it's constraining industrial development. There could be 10,000 people there, and if there's an industrial accident, a spillage of some sort, catastrophic release, how do those people get out in time? So I'll leave that question hanging, but it shouldn't be put there. Now we're going to move to Barter Beach. I spoke to you a little bit earlier about. Barter Beach is where the new port in Kwinana would be located if Westport's recommendations are ultimately taken up. There's a good view of the waste to energy plant directly on my right at the moment. Pretty good view. We're approaching straight ahead. You can see, if you look through some of the gaps, you'll see the orange. That's the bauxite that we were on the other side of before. You can see how extensive that land is as the laydown area behind the Kwinana Bulk Terminal. Coburn Cement on our left over there. They've just been approved for an expansion which is about $120 million worth. So they're here for the long haul, which is great to see. A good long-term stable member of Kwinana Industries Council. So here's the waste to energy plant. We're getting nice and close to it now. It's going to go twice as high as it already, as you can see, it already is there. So, and it's going to go quite a bit further eastwards. A big facility. Like I said before, it's the first one in Australia. There's about 1,400 of them around the world. I had the pleasure of visiting Tokyo several years ago to see waste to energy plants, and I saw 4. 2 of them were in built up areas with residents directly living literally over the road from these facilities. They have very advanced chemical scrubbing in the emissions stacks and very, very high temperature combustion, so combustion is complete. It's not an alternative to recycling, so we've got to keep doing our recycling, but it's going to take out the materials that we send to a landfill. A landfill basically is the worst thing you can do with rubbish, because it's a legacy. It makes methane for years and years and years. So anyway, I'm a great supporter, as you can tell. As we cross here, this is actually the road reservation on both sides for the road that would go into the new port, and it goes all the way up to Rockingham Road. We'll go there later on and I'll show you in reality what that means. But the pipe manufacturers here, these concrete lined steel pipes don't need to be manufactured in an industrial core, and it's a fairly rubbishy industry over on this side. It's not heavy, it's not dirty, it's not noxious. It doesn't need to be here. So I've been encouraging Westport to start negotiations to move them to an area that is far more suitable, and I'm pretty sure that's progressing. Anyway, they'll have to be compulsorily acquired if the port's coming down here. Now, directly ahead, there's a whole lot of electricity generation infrastructure. You see 2 large chimneys, there's 2 smaller chimneys to the back, and there's 2 stumpy looking chimneys here, stacks. The big stacks is where the Synergy power station that up until 5 years ago was burning coal. There's no coal burnt in the Kwinana Industrial Area for energy, for electricity production. It's all gas, and that's what those stumpy looking stacks are doing, the 4 of them. They are power production facilities using gas. Now, the company that's directly ahead of us, this little building, this is the Perth Seawater Desalination Plant. About 15% of Perth's drinking water comes from here, and it's drawn from in Coburn Sound and goes through a reverse osmosis process and is pumped back in. Now, there's a conflict with the new port because their intake and outflow infrastructure is where the port's going, so something's got to give. So that'll work its way out. There'll be an engineering solution that's worked out when the port ultimately does come here. Now, again, directly ahead of us, you can see the orange stuff, the bauxite. That's again another view of the laydown area that is available to support an expanded KBT, Kwinana Bulk Terminal. It's a very big area. So now we're heading into Barter Beach. Barter Beach, the Union, the MUA and the Fish Army call a public beach and a horse beach. The fact is that it's neither. Horses use it, but that doesn't make it a horse beach, and people swim here. It doesn't make it a public beach. It's a beach in an industrial area that is owned by the state government to the high water mark. People can use the beach, horses can use the beach, but it's actually not designated, it's not registered or zoned for recreation. It's industrial land. Looking to the south, we can see the other side of Kwinana Bulk Terminal. At the Kwinana Bulk Terminal, you can see a couple of tugboats that have been pushing in that ship to berth it so it can unload. When I spoke about the reclamation, it starts here. It starts from Kwinana Bulk Terminal and goes all the way up the beach to the Alcoa jetty. It's about 2 kilometres. How far out the reclamation would go? Well, there's the channel right out there. Now you can see a little bird down on the foreshore here, and I like to include the story if I see one. That's quite a rare bird. It's called a tern. In fact, it's called a left-hand tern. The reason they're called left-hand terns is because they do little circles anti-clockwise. So you've had a bit of a treat today, the left-hand tern. Way in the distance is the Australian Marine Complex. You can see a very large building and a not so large building. The Australian Marine Complex is the defence industry and shipbuilding maritime industry hub, the Australian Marine Complex. We're going to go for a drive through there a little bit later on. Now that area is also on a reclamation and it's full. So what I've been saying is that when we're talking about the freight task moving to this area from Fremantle, we should also be talking about the expansion of the Australian Marine Complex to accommodate the extra shipbuilding and ship maintenance and defence industry activity that we know is coming. There's probably going to be some quite significant announcements about that in the not too distant future. Over here is the old Bhp Export Facility. It's a jetty, it's been around for a very long time. It's derelict and probably in the Westport process will be demolished because it will be where the reclamation is. And incidentally, this area here, Barter Beach, was where a private port was going to be built. It was going to take trade, break bulk trade, which is like cars or sheep or livestock or whatever, it's scrap metal. And it was stage 1 of a private port. Stage 2 was to be further south. It got this area, the stage 1 got all of its environmental approvals, and this, I'm going back probably 18 to 20 years now, but it never progressed, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that, to do with other proposed ports from the state government, and there were problems with stage 2 being too close to one of the industries, so it got too complicated and it didn't eventuate. But the point I want to make is that it had all of its environmental approvals through the EPA. So that's pretty much it for this area. We'll now head north and go to what is the second public beach, called Challenger Beach, not Barter Beach, because it's not a public beach. Okay, got that? Oh, and look what we can see. Here comes one of these horses that don't know that it's not a horse beach, but that's okay. We won't get in its way. Directly ahead of us, over the top of that roof ahead of us, you can see some power pylon, the top of a power pylon. That signals where Ankertel Road intersects with Rockingham Road, and that's important because Ankertel Road from the east will be the major freight route that comes in over Rockingham Road and down into the port. right through to the dock, so that the trucks will be able to come off Anketel Road. That's wide loads, high wide loads, dangerous goods, road trains. They will be able to come onto the dock directly and be loaded or unloaded and head out the same way right across to the Tonkin Highway, which means then they can head north up to Kewdale or south down to the southwest, Australand and so forth. That would be the new Perth freight link. There's a whole lot of politics around whether it should be north of here as an extension of the Roe Highway, or whether it should be down here at Anketel Road. Logically, it would be at Anketel Road if the freight task from Fremantle moves to Kwinana. You wouldn't do Row 8 if the justification for it was for the freight trucks to get to the port. If the port moves here, the freight route should also move south. So that's what I'm saying. That needs to be re-looked at, and Westport have been doing a good job at that. So now we're heading out of the industrial core, and when we go, there's a bridge up here. When we go over the bridge, I'd like you to take a look to the left or the right, and you'll see how complex, or the complexity that's down there. That's the rail lines and pipeline corridors. Pipeline corridors are the arteries for the symbiosis projects, exchanges. I just got to be a bit careful. There's a few trucks ahead of us here. So remember, have a look over, and you can see the complexity. Now we've also got where directly ahead of us is the Alcoa Refinery, but to the left here are the pipeline corridors. You think, as I do, well, they're pretty vulnerable to a truck running off the road or something like that, and it would be quite catastrophic if that happened, because there's some quite important chemicals for the state that are in those pipelines. So pipeline governance, when I spoke about the fourth synergy being governance, pipeline governance falls under that category, and there needs to be a better management of the pipeline corridors. Now that's the state government's department, which is called Development WA. It's very complex. There are leases, easements, private property, public property. The whole thing is far too complex, to the point where sometimes, rather than running the synergy, the product between the companies through the pipeline, which would be the highly efficient way to do it, what they do is truck it between, it might be sulfuric acid or all sorts of chemicals. But anyway, that will get resolved in time. Now we're going to go into the BP service station here, and we're going to stop for a couple of reasons. One is I need a comfort break, and the other one is that I need a coffee. And I'm sure you too do too, so you might want to just take a break and grab yourself a coffee. So here we are, back in a minute. So we'll now head off to Challenger Beach, and take in a little bit more of the secondary industrial area that I've spoken about as being one of the synergies. All right, so you see the big transmission corridor, power lines, gives you an indication of the sort of energy that's coming out of the industrial area, and that services a lot of the southwestern grid, the Swiss. All right, now we've got Alcoa Alumina Refinery on the left. It's one of 3 refineries that Alcoa has in this region, although there's one here and there's 2 others around. The bushland you can see directly here is called Mount Brown. That's a regional park, environmental regional park. One of the roads that was planned to service the new port in Kwinana, and this is going back 15 years, was Rowley Road. And Rowley Road was essentially another freight corridor from the coast to the Tonkin Highway, which is about 12 kilometres east of here. So it was the orientation for that was on the other side of this little bit of bush and these tanks that are through here. That's not going to happen now. Ankertel Road will be the freight route. So passing Alcoa, you can see directly ahead of us the coast, and we are going in about 500 metres to take a turn to the left to take us down onto the coast. We will get a better look at the Australian Marine Complex, and that's where that big blue shed's part of. That's the Submarine shed, brand new. Interestingly, Mount Brown on our right, there used to be houses that were on there. That used to be a township, and it was a bit like Kwinana Beach township. It was demolished in the 60s, I think it was, or 70s, and it became the recipient of a firing range from offshore. So the ships would fire into there, and a bit of local knowledge, the local fire brigade, volunteer fire brigades, won't go up onto Mount Brown if it's on fire because of the unexploded ordnance. Now we're heading down to Challenger Beach, and we'll stop here before we go into the water. So what can we see? Well, to the south is the Alcoa export jetty for alumina, and there's a ship that's quite heavily loaded there. We can see a couple of those tugboats again. They're heading north up to Fremantle, and we can see the Australian Marine Complex on my hard right. What I'd like you to observe is the amount of reclamation you can see. So it juts out a long way into the water. When I spoke about the AMC needing to expand and defence industry needing a place to expand into, this is it. From the Alcoa jetty all the way to the Australian Marine Complex. There's essentially no seagrass along here, right out to the channel, which is a fair way out. What I reckon should happen is that the dock for the AMC and defence industry is floating and it's offshore. That means, and it's pinned, of course, floating and pinned, but it's directly connected to the reclamation for the new port in Kwinana when it happens, and that preserves this public beach and the limestone cliffs that you can see all the way down there. So we've got the cliffs, the beach, and then more beach, and it's all part of the Belia Regional Park, which is we were looking at before with Mount Brown. So that's quite an extensive regional park. So there's an elegant solution that preserves this public beach, and it has, if it was floating pinned to the seabed, it has no impact on the coastal processes. And like I said, there's no seagrass here. So there's some interesting little shacks along here that you can see again to my heart. We're going to drive through there, and I'll give you a talk about what they are. Once again, on our way. So we'll go through the Coburn shacks, as they are called. They were holiday homes many years ago when Rockingham and Kwinana were a long way from the metropolitan area in Perth. So these were holiday homes. I consider them to be inappropriate for being located in the industrial core, and we are in the industrial core. These are managed for the state government by the City of Coburn. They have a lease, 5-year leases. They're into their second lease, and I think they've got 2 years to go. There's people that have moved in here. They're not allowed to live here more than 120 days a year. But how's that policed? Well, it's an honesty system, so I don't put a lot of strength in that. And right over here is obviously a place that's permanently occupied. Now I know that there's several places that are permanently occupied. Here's another one. And some of them are rented to fly in, fly out workers to live here. Why is it not appropriate for these to be in the industrial area? Well, it's not safe, and there are emissions to contend with. If the Kwinana Beach township, which I spoke about really early on, and I'm going to speak about the Hope Valley township and the Wattleup townships, both of which were demolished within the last 15 to 20 years because they're too close to industry. Why is it that these shacks are allowed to be here when they're too close to industry? I don't think it's very well policed by the City of Coburn. There is the opportunity to be able to purchase these. You see them advertised for sale sometimes. They don't have any ablution servicing. That's done in communal ablution blocks. So, I don't know, it's a really difficult one. And they are in conflict with the proposed port in Kwinana. I find it unbelievable that there's one of the ablution blocks just here, just about to pass it. Unbelievable that new ones are being permitted by the City of Coburn. If we look straight ahead, we can see the big blue building and the extent of the reclamation. So it's quite wide. But these limestone cliffs are part of the Belia Regional Park and rightly should be preserved. This vegetation here is part of the Belia Regional Park as well, and again, rightly should be preserved. And we can get around the need to remove those by having the floating system offshore. So we'll head on our way back through here. Obviously there's one here. See the yellow buoy that we're just passing, the big yellow buoy? That belongs to the Department of Transport and is very expensive. I don't know how it got there, but it's there. And again, we can see some shacks that are probably permanently in use. I don't usually go too slow through here because some of the people don't like me very much. But anyway, we've got some lovely shacks here. Most of them have got solar panels on the roofs, which indicates people are living here longer than they should. And over here we have the lovely Lockwood number, and a little bit further along we have the lovely Brick Veneer number, and of course another one where I'm pretty sure somebody lives there permanently. So we'll get out of here before they realise I'm here again. And we'll head up to the Australian Marine Complex, the AMC. There's another set of their communal ablutions there. Okay. Right, we're off. Now, the Australian Marine Complex was set up under the Gallop government many years ago, state government, and it's a case of a state government taking a risk, going out on a limb and building a facility, infrastructure. And so it was called the Australian Marine Complex. It's a case of build it and they will come. Well, that was the punt. The Gallop government was widely criticised for it initially, but the critics would call it a white elephant, but it's anything but that. It was a terrific decision, and it's a great example of where governments have a role in facilitating industrial growth by providing the basic infrastructure. And the AMC is an absolutely perfect example of that. So much so now that it's completely full and needs to expand. And over this direction, we can see the extent of the reclamation that the AMC sits on. So what goes on here? Well, the shipbuilding, and this great big blue building here, enormous building, will have ships built in it. There's very advanced engineering, subsea engineering, wellheads, undersea compressors, pipeline technology. A lot of that is done in here, and it's very advanced. Barges of kit for mine sites are imported on barges into here, and they are loaded onto big trucks for high and wide loads, which are sent out into the mining regions for installation. There are calls to have more room for the AMC to expand into, and for the defence industry to start up. So there is a very strong argument for the Australian Marine Complex to expand. Literally the only place it can expand is southwards offshore, which is the direction we've come from. So we'll take a left hand into the AMC now, and I'll just give you a quick tour through there and then we'll head out again. We can't go onto any of the sites because of restrictions, but we can certainly drive through. So my key performance indicator for how well the AMC is doing is how many cars are parked on the verge. For many years, in the early days, you couldn't get a park anywhere. It was absolutely full. And then for several years, when we had the last downturn, no cars anywhere. But now they're coming back. So this place is really starting to get going again now. There's a lot of activity. There's a couple of big sites left. This one is now under construction, which is great to see. They're just assembling the kit to start building whatever it is that they're going to build. Again, you can see the scale of the Civmec building here and the scale of the operations. To the left, straight ahead of us, and to the right. This is a real success story. The red and white building over there is Matrix Engineering. They are a West Australian company, very, very advanced undersea technology that they're manufacturing. Over here is the Australian Submarine Corps, and if you look really carefully, you might even see a submarine that's extending out of the building at the moment. There's a floating dock in here to my hard left. You may be able to see that at some stage. That's a dock where the ship drives in and it then floats up, and then it goes on rails. Here comes a high wide load passing us right now, heading up to the north somewhere, an oversized load. It looks like a very interesting bit of kit. Directly ahead there's some Navy ships and the submarine over there that you can see. So this is getting quite busy now. There's about 7 or 8 Navy ships that are up on the hard stand, and they're up for major maintenance, refitting. They might be changing an engine out or doing some sort of major work on it. The big building on our left is on railway lines and can move over towards the water, and I haven't seen it move too much, but it's quite a big effort to do that, but it does. Now on this downward side here, again, there are lots of Navy ships that you'll see, and they're all under major refitting work as well. So the Australian Marine Complex in the suburb of Henderson, it's on the map that I gave you earlier, is getting going again, and it's very important to the Australian economy, and as the defence industry expands, there will be major expansion in this area. We're almost to the very north of the buffer zone now, and we're going to turn right just up here, but beyond that is the Water Corporation's Woodman Point Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's where the water that I talked about from the QWEP, the Kwinana Wastewater Reclamation Plant, comes from. So we've got all this way north, and that's where that water comes from on its journey out to the back of Garden Island. Secondary treated water, by the way. Now, directly ahead of us now, you'll see a tower. That's Coburn Cement's lime production facility, and is essential for industry. Alcoa wouldn't be here in this area if it wasn't for the production of lime locally. So very important in the industrial symbiosis space. I've spoken about the buffer before and some constraints. So this is in the city of Coburn. This part, the governance, local government governance of the Western Trade Coast is complex. We have 3 local governments. One has a long history, long association with industry, and gets industry, two of them are problematic for industry. The two that are problematic, both in some way are tending to support the rezoning of land that currently ensures residential development can't get too close, rezoning it to accommodate urban housing. So that, as I said right at the beginning, is a really big problem for industry, fundamental problem for industry. And state governments over the years have, and their supporting departments have failed to protect the buffer zone. The buffer zone is essential infrastructure for industry. We're trying again to have it preserved. The approach that we're using is trying to have it preserved with a special planning tool called a special control area, and that's currently in with the WA Planning Commission. It's a transparent, thorough process, and it is underway. We don't know how successful it's going to be. The buffer zone currently as it stands is big enough, but if it's starting to get whittled away by property developers looking for more and more marginal land for residential development, then we've got a problem. And I believe that this government will take us in the right direction to have that problem solved. We're now heading southwards on Stock Road. Notice that it's dual lane in each direction, and it's taking us, it transfers from Stock Road right now to Rockingham Road. And we're going through the suburb of Wattleup. Wattleup is the blue area on the map that I gave you earlier on. And there's quite a story to be told in here. Basically, it's undeveloped as far as industry goes, industrial uses go. And so it presents amazing opportunity for future industrial land. This dual carriageway goes all the way to Rockingham, and we've been right at the end of it at the beginning of this tour. So it's very long. It's got the right growth characteristics to be able to accommodate a lot more traffic. And as we travel south on Rockingham Road, you'll see in the distance the great big huge blue and white shed for Civmec that we saw before, and it's over here. These trees you see here on the right, that's the Belia Regional Park. So you can see that that's actually quite extensive. Now, as we come over the crest of the hill, I want you to start looking at the characteristics of the land that you see. And bear in mind, once you get about another 600 or 800 metres along, it used to be houses. It was the township of Wattleup. And the government of the day created legislation to begin a process to ultimately have this land zoned for industry. And nothing has happened since, except that the houses were compulsorily acquired and raised, flattened. So when we look over here to the left, look at the contours. Look how the land slopes up to the east. Look at the different building platforms. So there's been a lot of earthworks go on. It's all at different levels.